and welcome to another video with myself, Jerry McGuinness, aka the Irish Photoshopper. I'm going to be releasing a series of videos for beginners for photography, just to help them gather a little bit of understanding and knowledge, and broken down so simply and so easy to take on board. So, without further ado, let's get to it. So DSLR, it stands for a digital single lens reflex camera. Okay, well, it can be, there's different abbreviations of SLR or DSLR. That's probably what you'll hear mostly. I haven't had too much hands-on with the mirrorless cameras, and I shoot on DSLRs myself, so this is mainly where all of my experience is. So it's a digital camera that combines the optics and mechanisms of a single reflex camera with a digital image sensor. Okay, so hopefully you can see my mouse on the screen here. So what happens is, if you take your camera, okay, in order to capture a picture on your camera, what first happens is, wherever you're taking a photo of, okay, let's call it a light ray, the photo, okay, so the photo itself, let's say it's a person, so the light ray comes through the camera, okay, comes through the front, comes through the lens of the camera, and when it goes on beyond the lens, okay, there's a mirror, okay, just here in front of your sensor inside the camera, okay, so the light ray comes through the lens and through your iris, which is just like the, how would you say, it's like the eyeball or the pupil of the lens, okay, it comes through there, and what happens is, for you to actually see what you're taking a photo of, the images hits a mirror, which a mirror is then projected to this pentaprism, as they call it, and then you're able to see it through your viewfinder. Okay, so this is your reflection to show you where you're taking a photo of. When you take a photo, this mirror pops up and your image hits the sensor. Okay, so again, comes in through the front, hits the mirror, so you can see what you want to take the photo of. Once you take it, this mirror will lift and the image is recorded to the sensor, and that's when you can view it back on the back of your camera. So that's ideally, that's the way an image is captured on a camera. Okay, so in regards to lenses, okay, just to give you an idea, if you are interested in shooting certain types of photography, there's multiple different lenses out there that can help you achieve different looks. Okay, so normally the way it works is, the lower down in the millimeters, the wider the lens. Okay, the wider the lens, so for the likes of landscapes and so forth. So if you look here from 8 up to 24 millimeter, you're looking at a fisheye ultra wide lens. And what that will do is that'll help you capture panoramic shots, cityscapes, landscapes, real estate, abstract, but it gives you that nice little fisheye look to it as well. If you look up fisheye lenses, it'll actually just show you the way it stands out, but I'm sure you pretty much saw it already, but again, it'll make no harm having a look over it again. So 24 to 35, this will probably be your most standard wide angle lens, and probably the most used one. I know my one's 17 to 14 millimeter ultra wide, but again, 24 to 35 wide angle lens, great for interiors, landscapes, architecture, forest photography, and so forth. Okay, then when you start going up a little bit higher, then you saw your 35, 50, 85, 135, your standard prime lens. So what a prime lens is, if you notice from here, these are all just a fixed size. Okay, so you can zoom in or out with these. They're just a fixed lens or a fixed focal point of 35, 50, 85 and 135. If you wanted to zoom or get closer to your subject or further away, you actually have to physically walk to the subject or walk away. So that's why when we speak about prime lenses, we call zooming with your feet, because you have to get close to yourself. And these are ideal for the likes of portraits, weddings, street photography, documentaries, and filming as well. I've actually used them quite well for filming. And then we start to look at your zoom lens. Okay, so 55 to 200 would probably be one of the most popular ones. An excellent lens I would recommend investing into when you do get into it and you're up and running and you're happy and you have some money to spend on a good lens. The 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 is a fantastic lens. It's fantastic all around for portraits, weddings, wildlife. It's amazing, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Now, there are multiple different zoom lenses out there, but these are just going over probably the most sought after ones. Again, you're looking at macro lenses then. Okay, so macro lenses will be for taking the likes of finding shots of insects and bugs and all that sort of stuff, for rings and nature, just when you want to it's kind of like a microscope look to the photo. Okay, I know you've seen some of my photos. If you look on Jerry McGuinness Photography on Facebook and go into macro photography, you'll see what I'm talking about. They are, you know, if you look up macro shots, you'll actually see some pictures of bees and so forth that I've taken, and they look quite detailed. And I have a 100mm macro, but again, these seem to be like the entry level zooms and macros. And then you have telephoto, which is your ultra zoom lens, as I like to call them, so 100 to 600, and this is good for the likes of sports, wildlife and astronomy. Okay, so really long zoom on them. So now we're going to look at what makes a photo. Okay, so the very first and important thing that I must emphasize yourself is what we call the exposure triangle. Okay, the exposure triangle is what makes up an image. Okay, so if you look on the left hand side here, the exposure triangle, okay, this triangle is simply the relationship between three elements: your aperture, your shutter speed and your ISO, which we're going to look at now in just a moment. These three components work together to create an actual exposure or a photograph. It is referred to as the exposure triangle because when you adjust one of them, so whether you adjust the ISO, the aperture or the shutter speed, which is, you know, either element you want to adjust, you must change the other elements in order to get the photo you want. So if you change the ISO, you're then probably need to adjust your aperture or shutter speed. Okay, so again, a proper exposure is just another word for photograph or for an image. Okay, so for you to capture the correct exposure, you get the right balance on your ISO, the right balance on your aperture, then the right balance on your shutter speed, and that's where you get your in between properly exposed image. On the left hand side is what happens when we have too much light hitting the camera. Okay, so this is called an overexposed image, whether your settings have you allowing too much light in, and what it does is it blows up all the whites. So even if when you do go to edit this, chances are you may get somewhat of an okay photo out of it, but it's not going to look right, because it's just blown up way too much. So trying to recover it all, it's not impossible, but you know, that's not what you're looking for. You're looking to capture a proper photo, and you're looking to make it as hassle free as possible in post editing. Okay, on the right hand side we have an underexposed photo. So again, where you're not letting enough light in. So your settings have you where you're not letting enough light in. So again, in all of these instances, this is where your exposure triangle is obviously shown. Okay, your settings are not correct in our exposure triangle, so it's letting in too much light, or it's not correcting it's not letting in enough light. Apologies. But what happens when we get it right? When we get the exposure triangle right and we get the image that we want, then you have the properly exposed image right in the middle here, and that's what you're looking for. So you can see your skin tones, nothing's blown up, you can see your foreground, your background, you can see all of your textures and your landscapes and so forth. Okay, so an ISO, for me, it stands for, it's an artificial light basically on the inside of your camera. Okay, so if you look on the top of your camera, you should see an ISO button like here. Okay, so ISO is simply the camera setting that will brighten or darken a photo. So the more you increase it, it will brighten. When you decrease it, it will darken. Okay, as you increase, your photos will progressively get brighter, and for that reason you can capture photos in the dark or poor lighting conditions. This will allow you to become more flexible with your shutter speed and aperture settings. Now just keep this in mind, okay, depending on your camera body and the sensor and the range of the ISO, you will notice that usually when you start to go above ISO 800, you start to see noise or grain in the photo. So little pixels, we call them noise and grain. Okay, and this is basically when you're adding light to a darker image that's not a natural light source or a powerful light source. So in this instance, it's an artificial light on the inside of your camera for photos, let's say, and you're adding this to dark pixels, so it'll only darken them so much before it starts to pixelate or add noise and grain to the photo. Hope that makes sense. Now the images that I've shown you here, okay, so this is all the same exposure, but this is ISO 100, in the daytime, well, let's say late evening, ISO 100, ISO 200, ISO 400, 800, 1600 and so forth, okay? But again, on the more professional cameras, you know, like on the higher end of maybe 2 or 3 grand, the cameras, the ISO is quite high in them, and the way the sensor, the ISO, the way the whole camera is put together, it's basically they are able to capture or use a really high ISO without adding any or very little noise to an image. The lower kind of end camera bodies, once you start going over around ISO 800, you will start to see noise in the photo. Let's move on to aperture, or as you'll hear some of the professionals, or you might hear people in the industry saying f-stop. Okay, so basically what the aperture is, so in photography the pupil of the lens is called the aperture. Okay, so you can like the pupil of your eye. Okay, so you can shrink or enlarge the size of the aperture to allow more or less light to reach your sensor, to reach your camera sensor. Okay, so please have a look at your manual or use the internet to search up which button on the back of your camera will allow you to adjust the aperture. Okay, now again, as I said, we are going to be shooting in manual mode the whole time, so on the top of your camera, if you just turn the dial to M, that will allow you into manual, and that's when you'll be able to manually adjust your ISO, your aperture, and next your shutter speed. Okay, so a little bit of an explanation around aperture or f-stop. So basically, do you know when we take photos? Okay, so when you take a photo of a subject, okay, the aperture is basically your control of daylight. Okay, so the more open you have, it goes less down in the numbers. Okay, so a really low, a really open aperture is down around 1.2 to 1.4 up to around 2.8. okay, that will allow you to capture some amazing light in really poor lighting conditions. Okay, so this allows a lot more natural light. Then you start going up to your 2.8s, and again, as you can see, it does let in quite a lot of light, but just not as low down as them. So that's what I would be honest with you, if I was investing into lenses, try and get something as close to 2.8 as possible. Okay, then you have your 5.6. so as you can see, the more you go up, the more closed it's getting, so it's letting less daylight in. Okay, f11 and f22, which is closed nearly completely. Okay, and where this would be useful for you to look at. Okay, so let's just say this is your image that you want to take a photo of. Okay, now when you adjust your aperture, okay, so you have an aperture that's very wide open, it's letting in lots of light, and as you can see, your subject is really in focus, but the background is blurred. Okay, so this is what we call a very shallow depth of field. It means that your subject is in focus and the background is blurred. Okay, now as you go up in the f-stops, okay, you will actually see it's a little bit larger of an aperture. Okay, it's still quite low, believe it or not, but I know just for this document here it's saying it's quite large. It's actually not that large. It's a small depth of field with little in focus as well. Okay, so basically what will happen here is you will get your main subject. If you have your main subject right in the center point of your focus, depending on where you are, like if you're zoomed down on them and you have the whole lot of them in that little black focus ring in the middle of your camera when you're starting to focus, you'll get the whole body in shot, sharp. If you've zoomed in, or if you're trying to get a nice, shoulders, necks, eyes shot up that around that way, nice profile shot, and you're focusing just on the face and you're zoomed in, you'll only get the face sharp. Okay, so what happens here is, let's say on 1.4, because it's so wide open and you're shooting at a very very open aperture, it'll allow you to focus on something very little. So if you focus on if you're trying to get the eyes in shot, the chances are whichever eye you're focusing on, that would probably be the only thing in focus, because it's just so low of an aperture. if you up it a little bit to say f2.8, you should get both eyes in shot. Again, you know, you might just need to tinker a little bit and make sure that both eyes are covered in the red dot in the middle of your camera focus in camera. Okay, now if you wanted to get the whole face in focus, you would be, you know, going up to f5.6, so you get much more of those eyes, the skin, that texture all in the shot for you, and so forth. So as you can see, the more you go up, the more that comes into focus within your image. So you're starting off really low here. The more you come up, as you can see, although you're still taking your picture of your subject, the background is starting to come into play a little bit more in regards to starting to become a little bit more sharp. So again, it's no longer just focusing on this, keeping this sharp, it's bringing the background in. And as you can see, the higher you go, again, there's your subject, the background's coming in sharper again, and then even up to the highest, you're going to get everything in focus in the whole photo. So therefore you may get stuff, you know, especially with these 2 or 3 here, you may get stuff in the background sharp that you don't necessarily want to, where you just want your subject. Okay, so what I would say to you is, when you're starting to take some photos, mess around with the f-stop, see what way you're liking how the background is blurred, how your subject is not blurred, and just have a tinker with it and see what you think. It'll click straight away. Okay, now what happens is, obviously the more you go up, as I was saying to yourself, it's letting in less light. So again, you would need to the more you go, the more it's opening, it's letting in more light. The more it's closing, it's letting in less light. Okay, so when you're closing, you're going up, or you're going up in the numbers. When you're opening, you're going down in the numbers. So I hope that makes sense. If not, just, you know, ping me a mail or a message and just let me know, and I'll explain it a bit more. Maybe I'll do another video for you. So shutter speed. So your shutter speed is simply refers to the amount of time that the camera shutter is open. So the longer the shutter is open, the more light that passes through the camera sensor. Okay, conversely, the shorter the shutter is open, the less light that's able to pass through. So an easy way to understand this, understand the shutter side of it, is it's likened to your eyelids. You know, for example, if you shut your eyes, then open them for say half a second without blinking, and then shut them again, you've essentially created 1/2 second exposure to your eyes. Okay, that is for say a half second of light that was able to pass through to your retinas. Basically, it was a half a second. You had them open close within half a second, so only a half a second of light was able to hit your eyes. Okay, same thing happens with your camera lens and shutter. So a half second shutter speed, that means that when you press the shutter button, the shutter opens for half a second, allows light to pass through the camera sensor, and then closes again. Okay, so very short. The length of that action is determined either by your camera or you, depending on the camera mode you're using. This is adjustable on the camera using this is adjustable on your camera using the main dial wheel. Okay, so this main dial here, when you're in manual mode, this dial here will allow you to go down in the shutter speeds. Okay, so basically, if I go back to basically what it's saying is, if you're shooting, like if you notice it's going to go up 1 and 1 something of a second. Okay, so it might say 1 and 1/10, 1 and 1/50th, 1 and 1/60th, 1 and 800th, 1/800th of a second, 1,200th of a second, and so forth. Basically what that means is that this mirror is staying up for, let's say, whatever shutter speed you choose. So if it's 1/60th of a second, this mirror stays up for 1/60th of a second before it closes again. So if you're looking to get a nice, really crisp action shot, I'd say anything from, you know, you might get a decent one from 1/800th of a second up to 1,000, 1,200, 1,400, you know, 1,800. So that's 1/1000th of a second, 1/2000th of a second, 1/4000th of a second, and 1/8000th of a second. So that's how long that mirror will stay up for your light to be and your image to be exposed to the camera, basically. So once you start going under the say 800 or 1000 underneath, you'll notice that if you're taking a picture, an action shot of somebody, okay, so this is the way this diagram is showing you. It's kind of like an action. So whether sports running, anything like that you want to get an action shot of. The higher up in the shutter speed, the more crisper the action shot's going to be. When you start going down lower on them, so 1/500, 1/250, as you can see, they start to get more, the subject will start to get more blurry as it goes down. Okay, so the reason why you're probably saying to yourself, Jared, why would I need, like, if 1/800 or 1/1000 is giving me these sharp images, why would I use these? That's giving you sharp images for images that are moving. Okay, so what it also does is it lets less light in as well. So it might be an action shot. The real, like, sports cameras have a very high ISOs, and which allows them to be able to, you know, shoot in these high frame rates with very little light to get a good photo. On the likes of your camera body, anything above 800, you know, you're going to be letting very little light in. You're going to have a lot of noise in the photo. Okay, but when you want to do photos of anything, whether it's landscape or whether it's portraits or photos of people, that's when you'd be looking at coming down to, you know, your one let me see, I would recommend maybe anything 1/125th of a second or 1/160th of a second, down around that way. But again, my hands are quite shaky, so I have to kind of shoot at higher shutter speeds, whereas you might be able to keep it very steady at a lower shutter speed. Okay, so again, when you're shooting down low and in this, say in around 1/60th or 1/25th or 1/60th, any sort of movement within your subject, and it's going to blur. Okay, so you have to try and capture it staying very, very still. Okay, and what we will do eventually is we'll look at the very, very low shutter speeds if you get into landscape photography, and I will then show you in regards to why 1/30th and why 1/10th and you know, anything underneath that, what that's used is for mainly landscape photos. So what happens, let's say you're taking a photo of a landscape. If you wanted to get the water sprinkle in the air and catch every little water drop, yeah, okay, shoot with a very, very high shutter speed. If you wanted to get the water looking real milky and so forth, you shoot very, very low. Okay, so 1/30th down, anywhere from 1/30th down. But what that means is you can physically not touch the camera. You'd probably have to use a remote, because what happens is the camera will stay open for 1/30th of a second. Okay, and I know it doesn't seem quite long, but it is actually quite long. It lets in a lot of light because it's open for so long, and because the image, the water and so forth is moving, it captures every movement in that water, so it makes it look all smooth and silky. Okay, and it's the same with clouds and so forth. So that's why at the end of it, I will be recommending, you know, additional little stuff that you can buy, like remote shutters and so forth, to capture different images. But for now, you know, get to know the basics first before we go jumping into the advanced photos, like long exposure, panning and so forth. So I hope that makes sense. Again, if it doesn't make sense, please let me know. Thanks very much for watching this video, and I look forward to next week's lesson. Have a great day. Bye bye.